Welcome, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Eric, recently from Citizen Schools. I met Eric about 5 or 6 years ago, and there were two things that really stood out. I was there at Citizen Schools because we had several volunteers from Google who had really engaged with the program, was very excited, and I was told, hey, why don't you reach out and find out what they're doing? And there were two things that struck me right away. One is how incredibly analytic they are, and they talk about measures and outcomes, and it was like I was at Google. It was really interesting. And then the second thing was everybody was amazing. It was, and Eric himself included. It's just an amazing group of people, and I felt like I was at home, even though I wasn't inside Google at the time. We started to have a closer and closer relationship with Citizen Schools. We became one of the biggest contributor volunteers to the program, the after-school program and extended learning. I was really felt good about the work that we had done. And then I personally got involved in public education, wanting to change it to introduce computer science. And I really learned how amazingly difficult it is to change public education. And so if there are two things that stand out now about Eric, one is the incredible courage it takes to have a vision and turn it into a program that you really want to institute major change in how education is done, and not just turning around schools, but actually engaging broadly with schools. And the second piece is the tenacity. I think you founded Citizen Schools in '95, I think. So that's almost 20 years of working on this. And I just think the commitment that takes with such a difficult program of introducing something truly new into the public school systems is amazing. And it's not just something that's going on in Boston. It's not something that's just going on in Massachusetts. It's going on in several states across the country. And scaling the organization is what's really the big initiative right now. So he's written a book called The Opportunity Equation. It wasn't the easiest name. It wasn't my first choice, but the book is available to you for $10 over here, which is a subsidized price. Obviously, it's available on Google Play. Google Books is a phenomenal place to read digital content, so at some point that would be a good consideration as well. It's my great pleasure to introduce Eric Schwartz.
That's awesome. Stephen, thank you so much. I learned from Stephen many things about data, about heart, building a great culture. Learned that you can wear jeans to work every day, too, which is, now that I've moved on from the CEO role of Citizen Schools, I'm getting more comfortable with. But I want to thank, before getting into the book and what it's about, thank really the people of Google, which is what's made this relationship amazing. And we've built a relationship that started in Mountain View, grew here in Cambridge, was really the next place where it took hold. And now it's in New York and Chicago and other parts of the country as well. And we've had probably about 1,000 Googlers, many in this office, others across the country, who've gotten involved. And the heart connection as well as the brain connection to the work has been awesome. I hope it is a growing experience for the Googlers who mentor kids in Citizen Schools. I know it is for the students. I was on email this morning with Alan Sue, who was a colleague with many of you here in Cambridge, was one of the early volunteers here. He's out in Seattle now working with you guys. And he said he misses a lot of things about Boston. He didn't mention you, Steve, but he said he misses a lot of things about Cambridge and Boston. And one of the main things is his participation in Citizen Schools. But I want to thank Stephen. I want to also, and Stephen needs to go to have a conversation with the head of the state network of superintendents as part of the work he's doing in education. So appreciate you being here to do the introduction. Coming a little bit later is another person I want to thank just in absentia, and that's Stephen Rothstein, who is, as of 2 days ago, the new CEO of Citizen Schools. And I have been laboring on this for almost 20 years, and it's been a labor of love, and I'm staying involved on the board, but going on to start a new venture in higher education. But it is so satisfying and gratifying to be able to pass the baton to a really skilled leader who started Citizens Energy with Joe Kennedy some 20 plus years ago, ran Perkins School for the Blind and grew it into the largest international organization focused on blindness education. So at the end of this, you'll get a chance to meet Stephen, and he's terrific. So a couple things about the book. The Opportunity Equation. I didn't think the title was that difficult, but Stephen did. There's two really issues, two megatrends that the book is responding to, and the Citizen Schools is responding to. And the first megatrend is a dramatically growing, fast-growing gap between the achievement of upper and lower income kids. And even over the last 50 years, as we've been able to reduce somewhat the achievement gap in this country based on race. It's still way too big, but it's half the size it was 50 years ago. The gap in reading skills, in math skills, in college graduation rates between upper and lower income kids has gotten not a little bit bigger, but twice as big. So there's a lot of books about that. This book's not about that, but that's an underlying theme that the book ultimately addresses. The second underlying theme that sort of talked about in the introduction to the book is the greater consequence for the country and for individuals of that growing inequality. And when I grew up, the benefit of getting a college education versus a high school education was actually somewhat modest in terms of your lifelong earnings. You earned about 25 or 30% more. Someone with a high school graduate and a good work ethic could get a good job and join the middle class and buy a house. And that's generally not true today. And today, a college graduate earns twice as much as a high school graduate. So the consequence for individuals is much greater for this growing education gap. And the fact that, for low-income kids, the college graduation rate has grown from 6% a generation ago to just 8% today, while it's almost doubled for upper-income kids, has huge consequences for individuals and for our country. McKinsey, the consulting firm, estimates that we have a 3 to 5% permanent recession imposed on our economy by the fact that we're not able to lift up low-income kids to where their middle-income peers are. Stephen, how are you? Just introduce you in absentia. This is Stephen Rothstein, new CEO of Citizen Schools. So those are sort of some of the underlying themes that the book addresses. But what the book's about is, well, what's causing this gap? What is causing this dramatically larger achievement gap that I think is really undermining the American dream and presents real challenges for this country in the next generation and beyond. And there have been sort of two major theories about what's causing the growing gap. And the first is just poverty, the growing economic gap and poverty. And while it's true that poverty is highly correlated to lower educational outcomes, I don't think it's right to say that that's really the cause of the gap, because there are so many examples of students living in poverty who, when provided with the right assets and the right resources in learning, blossom and achieve at high levels and do move on to finish high school, finish college at the same rates as their middle-income peers. And Citizen Schools is one great example of that. The other theory that's out there as to what's causing this sort of achievement gap is that it's teachers and bad teachers and teachers' unions undermining our public schools. But in both these cases, the poverty explanation and the teacher explanation, while they're challenges we have to wrestle with, if you really examine the issues, it doesn't add up that would be causing the growing gap. Poor kids are not learning less than they were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. They're actually learning a little bit more. But upper income kids are learning much more. And unions aren't stronger and teachers aren't worse or less qualified than they were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. My kids are getting a great public school education in Brookline. There's many schools with unionized teachers in different kinds of districts who are delivering a great education. The real difference, I think, is a whole array of leadership and learning opportunities that upper income kids are getting out of school. And so that's really what the book is about, is looking at from birth to age 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, upper income kids increasingly in just the last generation getting enrolled in Russian math classes and Kumon math classes, getting involved as they're 7, 8, 9, 12 years old in special enrichment programs, robotics camps. My daughter, as an 11-year-old, went last summer for 3.5 weeks to Argentina and was singing across the country. And she wrote back and said, "Dad, this is the life. I'm getting asked for autographs. I'm traveling around in a bus. I'm like a rock star." And that's a cool experience as an 11-year-old girl. And that was something we paid for and we organized and got her into that singing program. My son this summer went to Germany with the basketball team and got to tour around the country and visit Dachau, and that's an incredible experience. So the book chronicles this sort of dazzling array of extra learning opportunities that kids like mine and kids in communities like Brookline and many kids in Cambridge take for granted and are driving a bigger and bigger achievement gap. And it's academics, but it's also participation in church. 30 years ago, low-income kids were actually a little more likely to go to church or synagogue and have the social capital that comes with that. Today, upper-income kids are 50% more likely to be in church on any given weekend, and with that comes social capital, with that comes connections that help move you through high school and through college. It's jobs. You know, when I grew up, my wife, and I talk about her a little bit in the book, I'd grown up sort of as a privileged kid in New York with a huge number of opportunities. She grew up a first-generation immigrant, very low-income family in Hudson, Massachusetts, and she started working at age 11 in different summer jobs and lied about her age to get other summer jobs after having a paper route. Had probably 10 jobs before she went to Tufts, where she graduated. And that ladder of opportunity is increasingly not there for lower income kids. It's a third of kids today who work in the summer in their teenage years as opposed to 2/3. Upper income kids get internships. They find a way to get a connection, to get an unpaid internship at citizen schools or Google or elsewhere, and that helps drive them ahead to greater places. And for lower income kids, they're not always getting access to that. So the book's a lot about that. I use several vehicles to get at that idea of what I call an opportunity equation, that when you put in front of kids this vast array of opportunities out of school, it, with almost mathematical precision, leads those kids to success. And first couple chapters of the book are from my own story, which is a story of sort of a shock and awe of persistent opportunity overcoming early failure. That was quite persistent as well in my own life as a terrible student, but got so many opportunities out of school that helped me sort of move through that. Talk a little bit about my wife's, the opportunities she had. And then really the next part of the first half of the book, most of the first half of the book is about the development of citizen schools and the great work that we've done here in Boston and across the country, lifting up opportunity and really providing for low-income kids what upper-income kids take for granted, which is as simple an explanation of what Citizen Schools does as there is. You guys from Google, teaming up with AmeriCorps members, teaming up with financial advisors from Fidelity and grandmothers who know how to sew, coming together, helping kids be successful, helping kids have lots of chances to participate in great careers and learn about all kinds of opportunities that they didn't even know were out there, much less available to them. So I want to share a couple excerpts from the book, and this first one is about one of our early citizen teachers, a man named Joel. And we've had citizen teachers in rocket science and journalism and financial wizardry and many people doing Android apps and other things here at Google. Joel was a carpenter. Joel Bennett had a gentle smile and a truck full of saws, vice grips, files, and other tools to use in a burgeoning carpentry and cabinet making business. And Joel's business was stable, and he liked the feeling of tangible accomplishment he got from working with wood. But when he met Stephanie Davalos at a community event near his home in Boston's Jamaica Plains section, Joel volunteered that he'd always been curious about teaching. Sometimes, after completing yet another kitchen renovation or set of built-in bookcases for a home office, he wondered if teaching children might be a more satisfying way to spend his days. Citizen Schools became a way to dip his toe into the education world, and he signed up to teach a carpentry apprenticeship in the spring of 1996. That spring, we offered a Saturday program at Dorchester's Woodrow Wilson School, 4 blocks from the Victorian fixer-upper Maureen and I were soon to buy in nearby Ashmont Hill. We enrolled 64 students and offered 8 apprenticeships in the morning, followed by various field trips and learning activities in the afternoon. Joel's team of young carpenters set out to produce high-quality carpenter's toolboxes. They measured them, cut them, sanded them, shellacked them, the whole thing. The kids learned plenty. Those of us observing learned a couple things too. For starters, we learned that a few of the kids didn't know how to measure at all. In the second week, Joel asked a 7th grader named Keel to cut a piece of wood in half. And Keel said, "Half? What's half?" Keel was getting B's at the Woodrow Wilson Middle School, and he didn't know what half meant. I couldn't believe it. Joel broke down the concept of half. I remember him folding a piece of paper and then measuring his 2 feet compared to 1 before pulling out a tape measure and actually addressing the piece of wood at hand. Keel and Joel cut the piece of wood together, and they moved forward. Francisco was another young boy in the apprenticeship. He was 11 and a recent immigrant from Central America. His toolbox was a beautiful piece of work. Around week 9, the kids were planning their presentations and deciding what their toolboxes would be used for, gifts to their moms or just additions to their own personal workspaces. And Joel had noticed that on the side of his toolbox, Francisco had written Miguel in big block letters. Joel hadn't heard him talk about a Miguel, so he asked him, "Francisco, who's Miguel? I thought you were keeping this or giving it to your mom." "Miguel's this old man who lives in my neighborhood," said Francisco. "He's always doing nice things for me. He gets me ice cream. Last summer he took me out to a baseball game. I've never had anything to give to him, so I'm going to give this toolbox to Miguel." Francisco's story has stuck with me ever since. Even after telling his story dozens of times, I still get goosebumps imagining Francisco presenting his toolbox to Miguel. Our society embraces the giving of gifts to our children, but kids want the chance to give gifts too. Kids who grow up with the privilege of private classes in ceramics, jewelry, woodworking, or even music have plenty of chances to be givers of presents they created themselves. Providing kids the chance to be makers of things, not just consumers, is an important part of the opportunity equation. So Joel actually went on to teach a number of additional apprenticeships and then actually did become a teacher in the Boston Public Schools, which is not our goal. We think it's fantastic for folks to stay at Google or stay as carpenters, but we also think it's kind of a cool avenue into teaching as well. So I want to read, I have to read at least a brief passage about someone from Google who's volunteered. So I want to read a little bit about Alan Sue, who was one of a number of volunteers who taught many, many classes at the Edwards Middle School in Charlestown, which was the beginning of Citizen Schools' effort to move from an after-school program where we worked with 50 or 70 kids in a school. It made a big difference for them, but didn't fundamentally change the school, to what we call an expanded learning time school model, where every kid in the school moves from getting out at 1:30, which believe it or not is when Boston kids get out for the day, to getting out at 4:30 or 5. So we're now doing that in 30 schools around the country, and that started at the Edwards School, and Google was a big part of it. Equally, and the school went from being literally the lowest performing school in Boston to the highest in a 3-year period, from 17 families choosing it to 450 families choosing it, a total transformation. Equally important factors in the school's turnaround were the hundreds of volunteer citizen teachers who led apprenticeship courses. People like David Mantis. Mantis taught rocket science 7 times at the Edwards, forging hundreds of relationships with students like Adam Barriga. Tony Healy's the retired businessman who advised Principal Sabin in the early years of the Edwards turnaround, taught astronomy at Citizen Schools 15 times, including multiple times at Edwards. And Alan Sue, a whiz kid engineer at Google's Cambridge office, taught computer programming classes 5 times at the Eddy. So if you know Alan, tell him he's a whiz kid engineer, if you didn't know it already. Sue is such a talent that even as a relatively young engineer, Google tapped him to help lead the team that made YouTube, a Google subsidiary, faster, helping the company live stream every event at the 2012 London Olympics. But teaching was tougher than Sue expected. He taught his first apprenticeship at the Edwards, the first year of expanded learning time, and Sue remembers feeling a little naive when he realized the web design curriculum he had put together was over the heads of most of the students in his class, and that many of the students didn't seem motivated to learn. Despite the challenge, Sue committed to teach again. His next course involved creation of a public service app for the Android phone, an app that would enhance the experience for participants in First Night, a popular Boston arts festival. The idea, said Sue, was to make First Night more interactive and to drive up attendance. You could imagine a clue on the ice sculptures, and then people would have to take a picture to show they were there. The students learned the basics of putting together a user interface and basic computer programming, and by the time they were done, they had the bones of a really cool app. Sue's since come back to teach 3 more times and said he's seen a transformation at the Edwards and in its students. It's palpable, the difference in the attitude of the kids. It's night and day. There's no more too cool for school, and now the students see that learning can be really fun. Sue said that his personal motivation to volunteer has grown too. The thing I love is the combination of the boots on the ground experience, the experience of introducing kids to something out of the ordinary, and helping them realize that the web is not just something to consume from, they can be creators too. I love the combination of getting to know the kids and also seeing the results at the Edwards, which are incontrovertible. I also love that I have a role in addressing one of the greater inequities in our society. Alan and all the volunteers who've been involved have done a ton to address the inequities, and Citizen Schools has now created a proof point in about 30 schools across 11, 12 districts around the country where we're delivering similar results or better results to the top charter schools and to top private schools in terms of growth in student learning per year. And the question now, and the question of the second half of the book, is how can we scale that? And what really are the key dimensions there? And how do we grow, both through Citizen Schools and other similar programs, similar experiences, so that a generation from now, it can be the new normal, that all kids in urban communities have a longer learning day, that all kids have many more mentors, that all kids have every chance to discover and achieve their dreams, which is our mission. Bless you. In the second half of the book, we talk about sort of 5 themes, 5 building blocks for student learning. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but I'll read short passages around 1 or 2 of them. But one of them is just supporting teachers. Urban teachers work incredibly hard. They have, middle school teachers might have 5 classes of 30 kids. How do you talk to parents? How do you build individual relationships with kids? When you have an AmeriCorps member helping you out, it gives you a chance to do pull-out tutoring. It gives you someone who can reach out to the parents at night. It gives you someone who can get the kids more motivated to learn in their regular classes, because they see how math ties into designing an app for the Android phone, which is pretty cool and makes the kid more motivated. So there's a chapter about that. There's a chapter about social capital and social skills. And we think of that as maybe an exotic thing that Robert Putnam studies at Harvard. But the truth is that social capital and social skills are at least as important as math skills and writing skills to getting ahead in the work world today. But we haven't organized schools to build those skills. And Citizen Schools brings a whole new dimension into schools where, in an expanded learning time environment, kids are building their networks. They're learning how to work with adults. They're learning how to ask questions, learning how to work with teammates in different ways. There's a whole chapter in the book about creativity and the massive mismatch in our education system between teaching kids how to repeat facts, which is still most of what school is about, and teaching kids how to innovate and create and design things where there's no playbook, which is what you guys do all the time and what most jobs in the future, most good jobs, are going to require. So how do you build the skill to create and innovate? You practice. And how do you practice? You create when you're a kid. So Citizen Schools through the apprenticeships gives kids lots of chances, and there's a whole chapter about that. Um, I want to, the core underpinning of the Citizen Schools idea is just the notion of more time for learning. And Malcolm Gladwell's idea is that sometimes you just need those 10,000 hours to get good at anything. And one of the biggest differences between upper and lower income kids is while their school day is the same, their learning day is very different. My kids get out of school at not 1:30 but 2:15 in the afternoon, but then they've got a lot of supervised homework, they've got all kinds of enrichment, all kinds of activities in the afternoon. So more time, I think it just has to become the new normal in America's urban schools, that kids have a 9 or 10 hour learning day, and we bring to them all the enrichment that their upper income peers take for granted. So I want to read one story about a particular kid and some of the benefits of a longer day. Extra time's particularly important for English language learners who need more chances to use English in real-world contexts, and for special education students who often need expert intervention from trained professionals, as well as more personal attention and guidance and extra time to master academic content. But the extra time can be stressful too, adding more opportunity for conflict and challenge. Tyreek, a special needs student enrolled in one of our Boston ELT schools, is a case in point. In many ways, Tyreek fits my favorite description of a middle schooler, as having the full emotional range of an Italian aria packed into the attention span of a gnat. Tyreek has the capacity to show that full emotional range, but when our staff first encountered him in the fall of 2012, most of what we saw was anger. He spent most of his first semester in middle school getting kicked out of the classroom at all times of day for swearing, breaking things, and fighting with other students in his separate education group, the Therapeutic Learning Community. He could often be seen storming down the hallway to the timeout room, paraprofessionals hurrying behind to help him calm down and redirect his behavior so that he could re-enter the classroom. Tyreek lacked the patience and emotional skills to cope with his frustration in a healthy way, and he lacked the desire to do well in his classes. He ripped up tests and broke pencils to avoid performing academic tasks. His grades and scores were rock bottom. I've met a lot of kids like Tyreek over the years, and typically school does not work out well for them. They have emotional issues or attention issues or organizational issues or reading issues or all of the above. For medical reasons and sometimes because of severe daily trauma in their lives, tasks like listening to instructions and following directions and working in groups and doing multi-step problems are really hard. Some days they just can't do it. They're so angry they feel like their head's going to explode. And it gets even harder because classmates in their special needs cluster have similar problems, so they reinforce and add to each other's challenges. Further, they all notice that they are in the therapeutic learning community or the learning adaptive behavior cluster or just the special needs class, and they feel ashamed. In the cafeteria, other students call them the dumb kids or the weird kids or use SPED as an epithet and avert their gaze as they walk through. When they sign up for a sports team, which is rare, they often get kicked off the team for yelling at the coach or not following a play or for some other transgression. Tyreek's school had some uncommonly good special education teachers, but his lack of emotional control and intense struggles with executive function were on full display when he entered his Citizen Schools classroom at the end of each day last fall, the first year of mandatory expanded learning time at the McCormick Middle School. When he was assigned to the soccer apprenticeship on Thursday afternoons, he refused to enter the classroom the first week. And the second week, he entered reluctantly, unleashing a torrent of curse words. It was the same story when guests would come in to help teach the apprenticeship, such as Pat Kirby, then the executive director of Citizen Schools, Massachusetts. Kirby, a college-level soccer player, remembers casually ignoring Tyreek's initial stream of foul language and encouraging him to participate, to share his knowledge of sports statistics and to play in the scrimmage at the end of the lesson, something he'd never done in any previous week. Kirby arrived in the fourth week of the apprenticeship, and his presence marked the first in a series of turning points for Tyreek. According to his Citizen Schools team leader, Tyreek talked about his positive experience in soccer all week long. In a world devoid of positive male role models, Tyreek came to depend on Kirby, his new mentor. He started to open up in his soccer apprenticeship, looking forward to it each week and earning the title of Team MVP in the final Wow Bowl tournament. He went from literally standing on the sidelines of the game, reluctant to enter the fray, to running into the chaos and helping to score the winning goal. In the spring, Tyreek rejoined the soccer apprenticeship and served as the team captain. He took his new role very seriously, rarely swearing, and impressing teachers with his growing emotional maturity and his kindness to other students on the field. For someone who initially seemed unable to display any empathy, actions he now took, such as using the word "we" to refer to his teammates and helping people up when they fell, were big developments. Tyreek's improved behavior started to spread to his regular Citizen Schools team too, and eventually to his performance in the classroom. He started to improve his grades, and one day when Pat Kirby came in to visit him, Tyreek bragged about earning a perfect score on a recent math test. Tyreek's only hesitation in playing on the soccer team in the spring was missing the opportunity to be in the camping apprenticeship, which was held at the same time. To build on Tyreek's momentum, however, Citizen Schools staff agreed that after the soccer apprenticeship ended, he could join in the last few weeks of camping, and if his behavior kept improving, could participate in the Camping Wow, an authentic overnight camping experience in the Blue Hills Reservation, about 10 miles outside Boston. Tyreek was initially wary of the many deprivations involved in camping, but when the camping day came, he was eventually laughing and running around with new friends. He recruited others to watch the sunset over Ponkapog Pond, which he described as peaceful and beautiful. He slept through the night in his tent and completed an 8-mile hike the next day. Tyreek told his team leader during a quiet moment on the trip that during the past year, having more time to work with people like her and Mr. Kirby helped me work on my behavior. And now Mr. White, the coordinator of the TLC program, wants me to do regular education classes next year. She asked him, "Are you scared for next year?" And he replied, "No, I already have friends that are older than me." And he named several of the other students on the camping trip and from his sports apprenticeship teams. For Tyreek and other students, expanded learning time gives them time to slow down, to literally and figuratively watch the sunset and soak in some extra time with a mentor, a teacher, or an interesting assignment. So I wanted to share that story just to give you a sense of the impact you can have as a citizen volunteer on one kid and on the country. And the book goes on to talk and finishes with sort of a call to action to people who work at Google, to people who work in offices and retirees and college students across the country to get involved, because we are not going to build an opportunity society. We're not going to erase that growing achievement gap by waiting for a better test, by waiting for a better online education program, by waiting for some better policy to come out of Beacon Hill or out of Washington, D.C. We're going to lift up our schools and we're going to lift up opportunity only through the one thing that's ever really changed things in a big way in this country, which is citizen leadership. And from the citizen soldiers who put down their pitchforks and picked up their muskets to defeat the British Army and create this country, to the abolitionists, to the suffragette leaders, to the civil rights citizens who led the civil rights movement that has done so much to make this a better country. This country has only moved forward in powerful ways when average citizens, like all of us in this room, have gotten involved and gotten engaged. And I want to ask you, many of you are already involved with Citizen Schools, but stay involved. Volunteer with other programs. Volunteer as a big brother, a big sister at National Academies Foundation, at Citizen Schools, at US 2020. Get engaged. Get people to buy this book and to talk about this book and to think differently about education, not as something to wring our hands about with all the challenges, but as something to be excited that we have today thousands of examples of success, which we did not have 20 years ago. Citizen Schools, and you guys are helping to create that. So my request to you is think about how you can build up Citizen Schools, how you can get people talking about this book, how you can get your own family and other people you know to be more involved as active citizens, because that is the one thing that has the power to move this country forward and to lift up opportunity. And that's a really important thing for this country to do. So thank you so much for being here. We have some time, I think, for some questions or dialogue, and I really appreciate the help of everyone in the room and appreciate you coming here before lunch on a Thursday morning. Thank you. We have maybe 15 minutes for any questions or dialogue or discussions or thoughts that any of you have. Yes. Hi.
I have a somewhat selfish question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
I'm a parent in the Cambridge public school system.
Okay.
I believe very strongly in the potential of that school system, and I'm just curious if you're talking to Jeffrey Young or working with anyone there about the Citizen Schools program.
Yeah, thank you. We are not talking right now to folks in Cambridge, and we're working in the Chelsea school system and the Boston school system and really trying to grow our efforts there. But one of the things that Stephen is really, I think, excited to do is to think about what are the various ways that we can support, that we can bring this model or elements of it to many more places. One of the things that I'm proud that we've launched in the last few years is an initiative called US 2020. And that is an initiative that we've worked with the Cambridge Public Schools on. And it's an effort to massively scale mentoring in science, technology, engineering, and math. Imagine millions of STEM professionals working with kids in Cambridge schools and Boston schools and all over the country. And they might be working the expanded learning time hours or at 9 in the morning alongside a teacher or after school. But that's something that I've had some conversations with the mayor of Cambridge and others, and they have some interest. So we may be able to help there. And I want Citizen Schools to be omnipresent. So you should talk to Stephen afterwards, get the superintendent or others to be in touch directly with him and with Amy Sargent is here from the Massachusetts team and others, because that's a conversation we want to have. And whether it's just some ideas around how things that are already happening in the schools could be tweaked a little bit to bring more creative thinking, more longer learning day, more chances for mentorship for kids. That's great. Maybe we can advise a little bit. But the idea of bringing the full-fledged Citizen Schools program to the Cambridge schools that need it most is something we certainly wouldn't rule out as well. So thanks for your leadership in Cambridge, and thanks for the question. Yeah.
I know in the book you talk about actually the school in Boston, the Eddy, where Alan Sue was volunteering, and the incredible turnaround it had, going from something that was about to be closed to something that actually got a lot of national praise for how strong of a school it was after a couple of years of Citizen Schools being involved. What are some of your favorite turnaround stories of not just individual students having breakthroughs, but schools like that having breakthroughs and a school level change that your program has been able to help with?
That's great. Thank you. So a couple I mentioned are homegrown right here. The Edwards was the first, and I just alluded to it a little bit in the talk, but this was a school that, as Travis mentions, was very close to being closed down. In a 3-year period before they started expanded learning time, there were 53 assaults of teachers by students. It was the lowest or second lowest performing school on all the different metrics, test scores, and parent demand across the Boston system. And they didn't get a new principal. They had some turnover in their teachers, but not wholesale turnover. What they got was a 9.5-hour day. What they got is every kid in middle school taking 4 apprenticeships a year. What they got is every kid in middle school having an extra hour of math instruction every day, led by Citizen Schools and AmeriCorps members. And that combination of the extra academics, the extra enrichment, just totally changed things. The spirit of the school, they had a football team, they had a cheerleading squad. Spirit of the school took off, and it went to one of the most oversubscribed schools, big waiting list, erased 80% of the achievement gap with suburban schools in English, and reversed the achievement gap in math. And so that was the first sort of school turnaround story that convinced us as an organization we need to move from sort of working with some kids in a school to working with all kids. And that could really then be not only an innovative model around the edges of public education, but a fundamental change to the offering of public education. And really bringing into urban schools and integrating within them a lot of what upper middle class families have managed to create in combination with public schools in their communities. A couple years after that, Orchard Gardens sort of replaced the Edwards as the lowest performing school in Boston. It was in the bottom 5 or 6 performing schools in the whole state of Massachusetts. And that became a turnaround school. So there actually were a fair amount of new teachers in that school, but also they moved to a 10-hour learning day. And at the middle school level, Citizen Schools was the lead partner. And while they've had a real improvement across all the grades, K through 8 school, the middle school grades have taken off. And it went from being one of the lowest performing schools in Boston to literally the highest growth scores of any school in the state of Massachusetts 3 years after doing expanded learning time. So that was an incredible story. We now have the new principal of that school is a former Citizen Schools campus director. She worked at the McCormick School, and that's sort of early stage turnaround, but I know a lot of Googlers have worked at the McCormick. That's where we started 20 years ago. And that school, the data that's about to come out on the MCAS in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, amazing growth scores. Some of the highest in the city, some of the highest in the state for a school that also was not too far away from being closed and really struggling. There have been others in East Palo Alto, in Chicago last year. Our kids showed almost 2 full years of learning growth as opposed to the typical 1 year across 4 schools that we're in Chicago. So a number of schools, and we're excited to now have a handful of school superintendents. If Cambridge joins the list, that'd be great, saying we want to make this normal. We want to invest in this. We know it's not going to come for free, but we want to think differently. We want to really think outside of the box and not tinker with the school system. That's what generally gets done. People just like add a little bit, subtract a little bit. The budget's pretty much next year what it was last year, but think much differently and really think about a much longer learning day, not a little bit longer learning day. Much different set of activities, whole different talent model. And we now have proof positive in 30 plus schools that when you do that, even with some of the toughest to reach kids in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the country, you can deliver outstanding results. So thanks, Travis, for that question. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions or comments from anyone?
So you said the first part of your book is about citizen schools. The second part is what comes next. So what comes next for you, Eric Schwartz?
Wow, thank you. So I am going to join the Stephen Rothstein fan club as the charter member. It's going to be my main job for the next year. And that's partly serious, mostly serious. But I'm going to, the book tours for the next month will pretty much be consuming. I've got like 31 events in 30 days, everywhere from the Dever McCormick School to the White House to Google events in 3 different cities. And that's going to be really exciting and also exhausting. Hoping to take a few months off after that. And then what I'm looking to do next is to innovate in the higher education area and to really bring some of the same themes of citizen schools to higher education. Experiential learning. So create a college where kids are getting half or maybe even more than half their credits through internships and externships that they reflect on and that give them real world experience in public service. Just like we have citizen teachers, have citizen professors, so that people who know a lot, have a lot of insights, but haven't become full-time professors, have a chance to teach one course a year at this college. And it'll start as a partnership with existing colleges and eventually the goal is to become an independent college. So that's my goal for my full-time job. I'm going to stay on the board of Citizen Schools and be a lifelong, deep champion. And I think Citizen Schools is frankly at a really exciting inflection point. We've got this initial proof point. We've got an amazing team. Stephen's an incredible visionary leader. And I think you're going to hear so much more about Citizen Schools in the years ahead. And really, we have a chance to become the new normal in urban education across the country. And be the new kindergarten. We can, 50 years ago, kindergarten was not taken for granted. Now it is. That should be the same thing, maybe 20 years from now. Expanded learning time should be taken for granted. And when we do that, and we do that in a high quality way, we will lift up opportunity for every kid in the country. So I'm going to stop there. I'm here. There's books here. I'm donating all author proceeds to Citizen Schools. So when you buy a book, you not only get subsidized by Google, but you help subsidize Citizen Schools. So buy one or two, and the great folks from the Porter Square bookstore are here, and this is a former Googler, I think, who's running the store. So thank you for being here, and thank you all for taking the time to come today. Appreciate it.